Before we start with this first conference, I would like to share a few tips about the conference. If you like to listen to the event in either Spanish or English, you can find the live interpretation option in the menu below. Just click on the globe icon, select your preferred language, and you're all set. Throughout each conference, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box at any time. Our team will be collecting them, and at the end of each session, I'll share some of them with our speakers during the Q&A session. So don't hold back and ask away. Now that we are getting ready, it's going to be an exciting day. We have full of conferences and we have panel with mentors. We are going to start in a few minutes our first conference. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So it's from the team 2910, Jack in the Bot. They are from Mill Creek, Washington. This team has 15 years of experience. How amazing is that? They were finalists last year in Newton and division winners at the World Championship in 2018 and 2022. They are known for their short robots. So please join me in welcoming Sudhir and Steve from Team 2910, Jack in the Bot. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Good morning.
We can't hear you guys. Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. We got it.
Hi,
Hi.
good morning. It's nice to be here.
Hi. We are really glad you're here. So whenever you're ready, you can start and you can share your screen.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, just getting set up here. Okay, good morning. It's 2910, Jack in the Bot. In 2017, brought in a new crop of recent alum mentors, and this resulted in what is similar to the current structure of how the team does its physical and code and wiring engineering. So the design philosophy has been relatively similar since. Patrick Wolfenden rejoined the team after having been a student on it in 2009 and 2010. So lots of the robots since then have looked like the robots that Patrick likes. So this presentation, we made a version of this last year to go over in our pop-up presentations. I'm Steve Caneb. I've been a mentor since 2008, and Evan Morrison also presented this and wrote about half of it last year when he was working on that. He was my mentor when I was a student, and we've been working and collaborating since. We both joined for the Charged Up season in 2023, joined the team. So now we have a little bit more insight into it, but throughout we'll be referring to the team as we or us, even if we weren't specifically there, because people who were there talked to us when we asked them about how we got there. So FRC games, robots start in a certain configuration. They have a height limit. And then in most games, it's the case that you can exceed that height limit that you start in during the game, because there are things that you can do above that start level. Places to put your robot to deliver something directly, or hanging bars, things to put an attachment onto and then pull your robot up off the ground. These are things that will recur in FRC games year by year. But there are a lot of things on the FRC field that are above your starting configuration height that you don't need to deal with, that in fact, these tasks are not necessary. And finding the tasks that aren't necessary is is important the first couple of days of the build season to make sure that you aren't doing stuff that's beyond what you're capable of. It's difficult to know what you're capable of, and this is something that teams are constantly reevaluating and spending a lot of effort to find their limits and then work beyond those limits for next year. But no matter what, no matter how good a team you are, having your center of gravity low is always good. If you can do it, and almost every year you can, it is preferable to having one that's high off the ground. And this leads to a robot that continues to work throughout the match and throughout the entire competition season. If you have to say we can't do this part of the game, if if we do this part of the game, we will have a higher center of gravity. You should have a serious discussion within your team about whether you should do that, because a high center of gravity impacts everything that you do, to the point where adding a task that your robot is capable of might mean that you can't actually do the rest of the game. So I'm starting with 2019 because 2018, the robot was relatively tall. It was similar to a lot of robots that year. 2910 didn't go out of its way to make a robot that didn't go above a certain height in 2018, but in 2019 they did. So the game had all of these scoring locations around your half of the field. You could score in about 40 locations if you didn't preset any of the hatch panels. And you had two game objects that you would put into each of these places sequentially. And the ranking point associated with game piece scoring meant that you had to entirely score one of the rockets on either side of the field. And 2910 had just come off a very successful season. They were world finalists at the 2018 Houston Championship. But they hadn't added any major resources since then. And it was the first year that they were highly competitive. So was it sustainable success, or did they just figure out something magical in the moment in 2018? So rather than saying, oh, we are definitely going to finish as well as we did in 2018, let's make a robot with similar capabilities. Still with just Patrick as the main mechanical engineering mentor, 2910 made the decision to say, let's not score higher than the first level of the field, because almost all of the scoring places on the field were on the first height available. So no elevator in this game, just a robot that could pick up pieces, rotate, and deliver with just one motion, just one elbow radial motion. The climbing challenge, the end game challenge for this year, was different than anything we'd seen before. So having to conceptualize how to do that rather than put a hook up above your starting robot height and pull down meant that there had to be significant engineering thought into how are we going to accomplish this task that we've never tried before. There weren't point bonuses for the second and third levels of the rocket. Everything was worth the same number of points. So 2910 Jack in the Bot looked at all of the places they could score and said, there will be enough places to score for us to be a high scoring robot in playoffs, just with the lowest level. It was a large robot base. They didn't compromise the size of it to fit more robots on top of Hab level 3 that year. And it was the first robot that had most of its architecture set up by cutouts of relatively thin metal sheet placed in the robot with a mirrored version of it on the other side, and then connected in between those. So what we call a parallel plate design. It was mostly designed around being able to put everything in 2 dimensions and then just set it up on both sides of the robot and call that done. And to get up to have level 3, the primary power for that was provided by big pneumatic pistons because it's straightforward. They mostly had to go from one one height on the floor to a second height, so only two locations, and most of the motion was linear. So pneumatics, even though they can bring a lot of problems, they are a simple solution mechanically um, to a lot of game challenges. So this robot was the second year that 2910 was running Swerve, and the ability to speed around the field with a new and well, the second version of what would eventually become the Swerve Drive Specialties modules that Patrick designed. Sorry for the choppiness in the video. Uh, this robot, Jordan, 2910 Jack in the Bot, was able to spend their match time on both sides of the cargo ship, just roaming around their half of the field, making them very difficult to defend because uh, it was fast, it was agile, and it stayed on the ground. Nothing went up above the starting configuration, so all four wheels stayed on the ground, and it just zipped around. Relative to other robots from this year, when they got to the higher levels of the rocket, many of them would have issues where they would have to drive slower so that they wouldn't tip over. So 2910 didn't have any speed restrictions on their driving, and they were able to navigate around the field very quickly. We have another quick video. This is how the climb worked. So because you picked up game pieces from the floor, the cargo balls, and you had to deliver them slightly higher than on the floor, they had to be up a couple of feet. The whole cargo ball mechanism had to rotate, had to be able to do the wrist motion. And because it didn't need to be lightning fast, just the absolute fastest thing, it could be very torquey. And we use this to push the front of the robot in coordinated motion with the pneumatic pistons that pushed up the back of the robot. So one design was able to do both scoring tasks, the main game piece scoring element and the end game mechanism. In 2020, the team, Jack in the Bot, was going to go to two competitions back to back in week 1 and week 2 of that year. And the game was extremely different. It was in 2019, you couldn't deliver any of the balls at range, where in Infinite Recharge, it was all about shooting. Your robot couldn't go above a certain height to deliver the balls into the inner and outer ports, the high goals. So you had to be able to launch the balls. You could hold up to 5 of the power cells of the game pieces, and there were protected zones at your loading station right under your goal and then on the sides of the field. And then there was a big end game structure in the middle of the field that had a whole lot of elements to it. But essentially, you were just trying to pick up 5 game pieces, bring them halfway across the field, and then shoot them into the high goal. So what 2910 did for this is didn't focus on being able to do anything other than directly pick up game pieces from the human player loading station that rolled on the carpet, as well as pick up the game pieces that started the match in auto on the floor. And because we continued to use a swerve drive, we knew that we could target the goal with just the base wheels. So we didn't need an extra mechanism for that, a turret. Turrets are great, but they do require extra engineering and thought to get all of that stuff moving relative to the base of your robot. So similar mechanical setup to 2019 to Jordan, where it was a 2D cutout plate that was mirrored to the other side, and everything existed within that. There was just a ball path. Rather than trying to figure out how to get the power cells, the game pieces that year, to go from 2 wide down to 1 wide to get into the shooter, everything started 1 wide. As soon as it entered the robot, it would just be in one straight line that uh, moved up through the robot back and forth. This way, the game pieces liked to not move through stuff. If you stuck them together, they would continue to stay stuck. And one of the things that Jack in the Bot noticed about this game was if you were doing the end game task, which was set up for about the last 30 seconds of the match, then the area in the center of the field was not somewhere you could drive through during. You could not drive through there to continue to score the game pieces. So they needed to be able to drive under the scoring panel, this table that was in the trench run in the protected zone on the side of the field. And that meant that their robot had to be short. So to get this to work, this is a video of it picking up game pieces off the ground. Again, it may be sort of buffering and slow, but the whole intake would funnel them just across the front of the bumpers and then directly into the ball management system, the S curve that formed the ball path. And it would do that before it got into the robot. And they would just live in there and move bit by bit up into the shooter and be staged just in serialized. So one after another in one straight line. This was very straightforward. This meant that the entire design and path of the balls could be conceptualized all at once. We did not have to think about what is going to happen when it moves from this part of the robot to this part of the robot. We knew what would happen. And this is from the release video showing how the lack of a turret was not a detriment because the robot was able to move its base to target onto the vision target that was at the high goal. So a second year where there was a part of the robot would slightly extend to climb at the end, but it was separated from everything else on the robot. And everything could just be short. Nothing had to pop up. Nothing for the power cell scoring had to move above the starting configuration. It was all very static. It was just a set of spinning wheels and a set of spinning belts to move the balls up into those fast spinning wheels. In 2021, it was a infinite recharge redux. It was playing the same game again, although it wouldn't be official competitions. And this meant that 2910 just made a second version of the same robot. This was the first Mark IV Swerve Drive Specialties swerve module. So to shrink everything down and just make the robot smaller to kind of prove out how small you can make a robot with the most recent version of the swerve modules, it was very similar to the robot from 2020 Grand. We called it Baby Grand because it was just mostly a scaled down version with a couple of lessons learned baked into it. But one of the things we learned about making this is still a very short robot. It was shorter than the previous version, but it was also a robot with a shorter wheelbase and narrower wheel track. So the wheels were closer together relative to the previous version. And this is a video from Chessy Champs of 2021 with the robot just stopping and falling over. Because while the center of gravity was pretty low on this robot, it was short. Because the wheels were close together, it did not have as much stability as you would want to have on a robot. And there were ways to make it so that the robot wouldn't fall over. It didn't fall over in most of its matches, but that requires not driving at full speed. So there is some trade-off if you have a smaller robot base to allow for more space around your robot for your partners to play or on a certain game element. Moving on to 2022, Rapid React, the first game back after the lockdowns, the field was pretty open. There was a game piece scoring mechanism in the center of the hub, and you could hold two game pieces at a time and you would just continuously launch, or you would try to make a cycle where you didn't go to a fixed location because the cargo would recycle out of the hub in a somewhat random distribution. So the robot had to be able to move around the field very quickly, then turn and very quickly lock on to the vision targets on the hub, and just do that over and over and over again very quickly. So maneuverability was again a very high priority. And looking at the game, there was a high place to score, and you had to launch the balls. So it takes technically less energy to launch a ball if your shooter wheels are higher up on your robot. But you can just put a little bit more power into it and have them lower, have your center of gravity lower. And we weren't worried about the cargo being blocked by a defender, by a tall defender with just a blocker shield, because we were launching them at such a high angle that actually it was never blocked. The balls come out high enough because you wanted a high arc to score into the funnel at the top, that there was no actual shooting penalty for having all of your launching mechanism lower, because there were only two balls, only two cargo that could be in your robot, except for the momentary thing. There did not need to be a very long ball path, so there didn't need to be structure below or in front of the shooter for that year. So very similar intake as previous years, and the structure was the same, parallel plates, so a 2D thing mirrored, and the shooter hood, since it had to adjust the angle that the cargo would come out at to shoot from different ranges on the field, it already had to move angle. So just making that very powerful, very torquey allowed us to use that as the thing that would rotate the robot as it was going through the end game, moving through the bars. So one system being able to do two tasks means that you don't have to fit another system next to it. And just two game pieces, there didn't need to be separation between them. The cargo for that year were tennis balls, so they could rub against each other, and it didn't matter if they were right next to each other. They could just be introduced to the shooter very quickly. And these are some videos of just the robot moving around very quickly. Well, not quickly in the loading of the video, but going from these different locations around the field to pick up the game pieces, and then just rotating to get to the scoring position. So didn't need a turret for this. The swerve drive would be able to rotate the robot base, and the hood, the angled shooter hood would deal with the range that needed to change based on where we were shooting. And this was one of the most successful autonomous modes from that year, very consistent. The robot was relatively straightforward to put together. So before it competed, even the first week that it competed, it was already at a point where it was doing the 5 cargo autonomous. So the most points that any one robot, for the most part, scored from that year. So just having the robot together for a lot of time meant that it was fairly well practiced, but very stable, large robot base, everything low to the ground. It moved very well. It was very repeatable. It was able to do autonomous mode the same way over and over. So Charged Up came. It was the next game. 2023 started, and your robot had to reach out very far to score on the high nodes from that year. Cubes and cones from that year, two different game pieces, very, very different game pieces from each other. One was rubber and it would squish, and it was a shape. It was an odd shape relative to other things. And the cube was just a ball. It was a ball with corners, but it was inflatable, so you had to protect it. But the end game task from this year was drive on top of a balancing structure. So you didn't need more than one mechanism to achieve anything in this game. You needed to be able to drive, and you needed to be able to move game pieces from where you pick them up at the in your loading zone and deliver them in your community nodes. Very straightforward game. So when we looked at this, one of the ways to be able to get a game piece far from your robot horizontally is to start moving it vertically, and then you can move it out. So an elevator and an extender is a very successful way that a lot of teams did it. But we saw that you did not need to go up really at all or very much. It was mostly an extension. So um, we looked at that and we saw that we did it would be straightforward if it was just one extension on a pivot. We wanted to be able to pick up game pieces from the floor on the opposite side that we delivered them. And we knew from early looking at the game and trying to map where robots would be driving, that one of the three robots really needed to be able to go over the charge station. Otherwise, you would be waiting for each other, going around the charge station as you were going into and out of your community. So we wanted to be the team that would be able to go over the charge station. And since it was a dynamic field element that you had to drive on, we wanted to have extremely low center of gravity while we were driving. We wanted also not just to be able to go over the charge station, but to be able to go over the charge station very quickly. So this was some of our set of requirements that we decided on at the beginning of the build season, near kickoff day or in the first week. We defined what it would be able to do. We needed to be able to drive very, very fast. Because we were only scoring in one direction, we could move the pivot of the arm all the way to the back of the robot because it would only have to act one way. We were able, because the arm sat so low in the robot, our center of gravity that year was below the top of the bumpers. So you could tip the robot all the way onto its side and it would land on its wheels. And this is what we're capable of doing in autonomous. Our robot is at the is on the red side on the far side of the charge station from the full field camera. So even having a robot that short, we were able to do the one of the difficult autonomous tasks that year because we could use the extension of the arm to shorten the paths that we had to drive. So able to get 3 of the game pieces in autonomous that year. And then in terms of just driving, here's a video of our robot and our practice robot at an off season cycling over the charge stations, going to the loading zones and to the communities, bouncing over that bouncing over the bump that was on one side of the charge station. These are all obstacles that could be daunting for some of the robots, but we just moved across them very quickly. And this last video I have is just a compilation of us trying to go over the charge station very fast. And the robot was stable enough because it was a relatively full-size drive base. That year it was 26 inches by 28 inches. So about as big as you would want to make a robot base. And it was light this year. The robot at inspection weight was about 90 pounds, but all of that weight was in the drivetrain or just barely above the drivetrain. The whole arm only weighed 80 pounds. So a big priority that year was just keep the weight low so that we can go fast. And in Crescendo, this year's game, in 2024, Jack in the Bot looked at the game and said, well, you can't be above a certain height except for climbing. And even climbing, you just need to move your climbing mechanism a little bit up to get onto that chain. Scoring from different locations around, shooting the notes None of this really necessitated a taller robot. But we also wanted to be able to play through defense and um, have all the capabilities of a very high scoring note robot. So we wanted to somehow fit a turret into it. And with an with no other mechanisms on the robot, just a climber that fit on the perimeter and a note, that left us a lot of room to put a whole bunch of note dealing with stuff. So the whole shooter mechanism we put on top of a turret that sat very, very low in the robot, just above the tubes that make up the drive base. Um, we additionally didn't want other things to be able to go up very high. Our amp mechanism eventually ended up being a bar that rotated out, so that was able to get up to the height of the bottom of the stage or the chains, and the climber hooks could go above that. But other than that, a robot could be in its tallest shooting position and drive under the stage, and we wouldn't touch anything. So that was important. We still wanted to have all of our weight very low, and we early in the season we decided not to do any development to be able to score in the trap, one of the main parts of the game that year, because it did not have an outsized influence in match scoring for playoffs. In playoffs, you could get 5 points for a note by scoring in the trap, or you could get 5 points for a note by scoring it in the place where you scored the notes all the time anyway. So this is how quickly our robot was able to move on the red side, just fast autonomous, moving to the center and picking up these game pieces, having poses for that turret, um, able to get a lot of stuff done with just a very short robot. Um, and this is some video of us driving across the field and taking notes from our opponents forward the area that they scored from and just shuttling them directly to our side. And a quick video of us playing through defense. If you look at the top right camera, Strike Force 2767 defended us very well in this playoff match, but the turret was a huge part of our success, being able to just barely get past them, past the wing line, and then immediately launch the note to our partners. So as much work as it was to fit the turret in there, we did see positive effects from it. So it is now our goal when we design the robots to keep the center of gravity below the top of the bumpers. The test you can do where you put it on its side and it falls down onto its wheels. This sometimes comes up in matches. We had one instance in 2023 charged up where the robot did go all the way over on its side as it tried to go up the charge station, but it did make it back onto its wheels. Keeping your center of gravity low makes stability pretty easy. That is more about your where your wheels are, how wide they are from each other, and then relative to your center of gravity. But having your center of gravity helps your stability very, very much. Being able to score on the higher parts of the game or move your robot to a place where it's higher above the ground and thus easier to score certain things, that might not be worth the trade-off of having your mechanisms up higher and the weight moving above a certain height. And you can also, if you need to, help your overall robot stability with things other than the physical movement of it. You can fix this in code, as the mechanical designers would say, and just slow your robot down, have it go slower if you have your elevator high, make sure that you're not doing too much coordinated motion that sends your robot off its wheels. So that's a quick overview of of 2010's last several robots. Oh, a question I saw was in 2023, how did we assure the safety of our electronics as we were flying over the ramp? we had a cutout belly pan that year, so the metal that was tying all of the tubes that make up the chassis together on the bottom, that had attachment points for all of our electronics, and so we had them attached to that belly pan, and yes, it was bouncing around and being impacted a lot, but we did not see um, anything that actually directly damaged our electronics. And making sure that they were still connected, that was basically just done with hot glue. Um, all of the connectors in our robot, um, coming out of different electrical components, we make sure to um, attach them with a little bit of adhesive. And otherwise, we don't use connectors if we don't have to. All of our wires are soldered from our motors to the power distribution panel. So we didn't do anything in particular to protect them, but just make sure that our wheels were mostly what was contacting the ramps. Another question I saw is, what was the biggest motivator this year for moving from auto targeting with the swerve as the base moving to target to having a turret? Um, and the biggest motivator was that we saw that there would be times during the match where somebody would be pushing against our drive base, trying to make us be at a different angle than the one we wanted to be at. And we had seen from Rapid React from 2022 that the absolute highest scoring potential robots from that year had swerve and a turret, so that somebody could be pushing them and they would still be locked onto the target. That was our thinking early in the season for why we wanted to have a turret, was just being able to deal with defense. The next question I see is, how can you calculate or distribute the weight during, how do you figure out where your center of gravity is going to be? How do you figure this out during testing? Different CAD programs, computer aided design programs, have the ability for you to assign specific mass weights to different components of the robot. So if everything in your robot is assigned, like this is aluminum, it weighs this much, the piece is this big, it can figure out. SolidWorks definitely can figure this out. Onshape has a slightly less robust way of doing this, but it can describe how much your robot weighs, and then you can, even if it doesn't tell you where the weight is on your overall model, you can say, well, the drive base is this heavy and the rest of the robot is this heavy. And you can do straightforward physics on that. You can also, some of it is what we do. We don't necessarily have all the weights in. Some of it is just kind of design experience, saying if the drive base for Typhoon for our 2024 robot weighs 85 pounds, it doesn't matter what we do with the rest of it. The center of gravity is going to be very, very low. The next question, is it better to have one complex mechanism or many different simple mechanisms on the robot? That's a very difficult, that does not by itself determine whether something's going to be high center of gravity or low center of gravity or heavy or light. That is a separate question. We have tended to like having one mechanism do many things, but that does not, it is not necessarily correlated, unfortunately. I don't know how much time I have left for these questions, but
You can take more, like 3 more minutes. That's just fine.
okay. The next one I see, how many prototypes of the turret and shooting mechanism did we make during the season? We had one prototype of the shooter, so just the end part of it that would deal with the notes as they were leaving the robot. But otherwise, it wasn't prototyped. There was a quick benchtop, just hand drills and shafts and wheels version of of the teacups of the mechanism that moved the notes from flat up into the shooter. We had one prototype of that, which we worked on for a couple of days, but it was mostly just conceptual, just in the mind. And sorry, I'll skip the schedule question because I think that that's kind of a larger question. And the next one I see is how high of a priority should mechanism integration be? Very, very high. The hardest thing we had to deal with this year in Crescendo was integration, was the game piece moving from different parts of the robot across. That we spent a lot of time on that and had to change the gearing in a lot of the note path this year. So anything you can do to make sure that things will move from one mechanism to the next is very important. The first 4.5, 5 weeks of build season, we're just trying to fit everything in. With the turret being so many different mechanisms, that was we blew past our CAD deadline by a week. We had to make sure that it was something that would physically go together. So mechanism integration was most of our season this year. I think that's all the questions that I am able to answer. I did give Serbotics a link to a viewable version of the presentation. So I don't know how that can be distributed, but hopefully we can work that out.
Sure.
Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Good morning.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you as part of the warm-up. You are so welcome to stay. You can write the answers that are left. I think that some questions are in there. And thank you so much for taking the time to answer the audience's questions so thoughtfully. We are so grateful for your participation, and we hope to see you again in the future editions of the warm-up.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So before we move on, here's a quick reminder, or if you just joined us, if you'd like to listen to the conference in either Spanish, English, or Portuguese, you can select your preferred language using the interpretation option on the menu. Also, remember that you can drop your questions in the chat at any time during the next conference. Our team will be collecting them, and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the end.